Welcome back to ALECTV. I'm Tom McLaughlin, coming to you once again from the 46th ALEC Annual Meeting in Austin, Texas. I'm here with Robby Soave from the Reason Foundation.
Yes.
Robby, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm great. So I couldn't help myself, along with everyone else here, watched you this morning at the breakfast, at the panel, and you did a great job, first of all.
Thank you.
But you guys were talking about free speech, and a lot of it goes kind of protecting the free speech on the internet, but I kind of want to go in a different direction with you and talk about free speech on campus, and specifically how, activism on college campuses kind of expanded into the public consciousness. Can you go a little bit further into that for me?
Sure. Over the last few years, we saw a number of successful attempts to prevent speakers from coming to campuses, often conservative speakers. They were shut down, they were censored, there was even sometimes violence directed against them by this small but very vocal group of activist, progressive students on the left who take the view that speech that makes them uncomfortable, that they disagree with, is a form of violence against them, undermines their safety, and so that they are justified in using militant tactics to prevent uncomfortable discussions from taking place on campus. Now, this is something affecting right-leaning speakers, but also left-leaning speakers as well. Their own professors are terrified of them. That's what they tell me in the interviews I did for the book, that they're afraid they're going to say something that offends one of their students, and there's going to be an investigation, and they're going to get in trouble. And it's a reasonable fear because it happens all the time.
We've seen it many times. So what's the genesis of this?
So it's hard to say because it's a cultural change that has taken place over a long period of time. I think the upbringing of young people from about the late 90s and on was more about safetyism, about protecting young people from every kind of harm imaginable, even if there wasn't a great deal of danger. I mean, actually, schools have been getting safer and safer. In the 90s, crime went down, but even though life was getting safer, you had this push to criminalize letting your kid play by themselves at the park or walk home from school. Parents get put in jail for allowing their kids to have some form of autonomy. So this idea that being a kid is very dangerous and you really need safety and protection. At some point that made the shift to words as well, so that words can wound and can hurt, and it's appropriate for the authority figures at schools and maybe in broader society as well to protect people from words that harm them.
So you're saying that there's no such thing as hate speech, that protected speech is all kinds of speech?
Well, yeah, so it's crystal clear from a legal perspective.
Right.
From the Supreme Court could not have been clearer that even the most offensive kind of speech is protected, even unless it's an actual threat of violence. Anything short of that, there's no such thing as hate speech. The Supreme Court has never recognized a category of unprotected speech deemed hate speech, only explicit threats of violence. That legal regime is so intact, but it's more stronger than it's ever been. But at the same time, the culture is moving. I'm worried, especially at some of the most elite institutions, at places like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, etc. The culture is becoming hostile to free speech.
Right. And you mentioned earlier that you're worried that this is making the jump from where it was previously mostly confined to campuses to the mainstream culture.
Right.
How is that happening?
Right, so what you're seeing is some number of young people, when they leave the campus, they go on to the real world, the business world. They're more likely to work in media companies, social media companies, and they are changing the workplace culture to orient around this idea of safety, such that you can't, if you're someone who disagrees with them and this happened at the Atlantic. This happened to Kevin Williamson, who's a conservative writer who had very conservative views on social issues, and they fired him immediately,
right.
Because him holding that view made it an unsafe working environment in the view of some young leftists who work there. Not everyone, this isn't a generational problem, just a couple people, but who have been very successful at shutting down the conversation on campus, and I'm quite worried we'll do the same thing online in our social media discourse, in private businesses, where they're changing it because they're using the legal regime, the harassment law, that kind of thing, to expand it in a way to shut down speech.
Right, and like you said, it's not a lot of people, it's just a very loud segment of people.
Yes. Yeah, I think most young people, they want to hear these speakers who come to campus. Or they certainly don't want them shut down or think that there should be any violence against them, but they're afraid to speak up when a small mob forms to stop the discussion from taking place, and they're afraid to oppose them. And professors are afraid to speak out about them because they think they could be investigated, because they have been investigated. So administrators need to do a much better job saying, no, you have academic freedom, you can dissent from this new norm, and you will not face repercussions.
Huh. All right, kind of wrapping up, is there a way back? Like, is there a fix? Is there some way to come back and kind of bring things back to the middle here? Or?
There's no easy fix. On campuses specifically, administrators need to respect professors and students' free speech and need to challenge the students who are fighting against that. I believe the answer to bad speech is more speech. I don't want to suppress the activists either. They have free speech rights.
Absolutely.
But I want people to be able to say, no, you're wrong and you're making this campus a worse place, and not face institutional retaliation for doing that. And that will make things better.
And you wrote a book about all this,
yes,
correct?
my book is called Panic Attack, Young Radicals in the Age of Trump. It's interviews with the kinds of young person on the left. And also on the right, I have a chapter about anti-speech activism coming from the far right, which is also abhorrent and is on the rise. So this is a bipartisan or cross-ideological problem that we really need to think seriously about.
Awesome. Robby, I want to thank you for your time today.
My
Thanks
pleasure.
for joining us at the ALECTV booth. Check out his book. What's it called again?
Panic Attack, Young Radicals in the Age of Trump.
Awesome, and keep it here for more ALECTV later on.